Hello again, and welcome back to another sound design video. Today we're going to be taking Hanzo from Overwatch and we're going to be redesigning his ultimate from bits and bobs you can find around your house. Before we get started, the reason why we're doing Hanzo's ultimate today is because of a YouTube channel called Blipsounds. They actually do a monthly competition for anyone to participate in, where they provide you with a video from a game and you have to basically redesign the sound to it. Now those guys over there do some really cool sound design videos, so it's definitely worth checking out, and I'm going to have links to all their stuff in the description of this video. They've even got a pretty big Discord group for you to check out if you're interested in sound design. So I thought it might be a fun idea for us to look at another sound design video whilst trying to meet the criteria that they set for us, which was simply that you can't use any sample libraries. It all has to be your own recordings that you process and turn into an original sound. So if you're interested in participating yourself, you've got till the 22nd of May, I believe, for this month, and then next month they'll do a different video and a different challenge. But if you want, you can go to their YouTube channel or their Twitter, which again I'll have linked, for you to check out how you participate. But with that out of the way, it's time to see how I went about creating my own version. Now, what you heard at the beginning was my recreated version of Hanzo's Ultimate. The only sample you were allowed to use in this is Hanzo's voiceover, him basically screaming his head off. So I'll quickly play that first. Other than that, all the recordings had to be completely original, which is what I've done. So the way I went about this was by breaking up the sound into 4 different sections. There's the bow, where he's drawing the bow. There's the power-up sound, which is kind of like all the energy he's putting into his shot before he fires it. There's the arrow bursting just as the portal opens and all the dragons come out. And then there is the dragon roar itself, which I've done twice. So once I'd arranged all the sounds for each section, I basically sent them all to their respective bus, which allowed me to kind of manage all the sounds a bit better and kind of mix them in. So let's start by having a look at the bow. So the main thing I used for the bow was a wicker basket because, well, knocking around my house, I've never noticed this before, but for some reason we've got loads of wicker baskets and they work perfectly for making the sound of the string kind of stretching out as the bow's drawn. So that was an easy decision. If I quickly play this without any processing on, you can hear the stretching of the wicker as I'm basically kind of tugging and squishing this basket. Then if I put some processing on, I don't think there was much added to it. Yeah, not much at all. I think it was just a little bit of compression and EQ, just to kind of thicken it up a bit. Yeah, oh, okay, so just remove some noise, just because there was a bit of a noisy place I was recording. It always is. And then just EQ'd it to make it sound a bit thicker by boosting some of the low end. Nice and simple. Then I think all I did was double it up again with the same thing, just a different recording of the wicker basket, same sort of processing. So altogether that sounds like this. So there's 2 sections. There's the kind of drawing of the bow and then there's it firing. Now these 2 sections here was me kind of slowly stretching out the wicker basket, whereas these 2 was kind of like a quick push to kind of, recreate the quick action of the bow firing. But if we go on to the 3rd track, it's another recording of wicker, but this time if I zoom in a bit so we can see it, it's basically there to give it a bit more crunch, as these were, they had a nice transient where they came in quite quickly, but then they didn't stick around very long, so I added one more track in just to add a bit of crunch. So if I just solo that on its own, there we go, it sounds like a snap almost. By the way, these 2 should not be there. I'm going to quickly delete them. Pretend you didn't see those regions. If we then have a look at the processing, I've first got some EQ on, and this time I'm kind of boosting the highs to counteract the lows of the first 2 recordings. And I've actually added a new plugin that I downloaded. By the way, this just goes to show how good the Blipsounds Discord is. This was just someone just posted in it saying, oh, there's this free convolution reverb plugin that people can try out. So I did it, and it's pretty cool. I think it's only free for 30 days, so it's a bit of a trial, but it was nice to kind of mess around with. It's quite a good selection of convolution reverbs for you to choose from. For this one, I've gone for the short reverse reverb. And I feel like this just kind of added to that snappy sound that I was after. So you can really feel the tension being released as the bow's fired. Finally, I think I just messed around with some pitch. Oh, just a little bit. I just dropped it down a little bit so it wasn't too twangy and harsh on your ears. And so all together, we get this. Now it's really starting to feel like a snap. Finally, because we've only got Wicker so far, we need a bit of a thud to really sell the impact of the bow, so I've added the sound of a balloon. So let's have a listen to that on its own without any processing. And then if we check out the processing on it, I've just removed some noise again from the room it was in, EQ'd it a bit, and I'm surprised I didn't add any low end, but there we go. I suppose I didn't need to. It's already quite a low sounding sound. And then finally, just a little bit of a compression just to control the transient so it doesn't burst your ear. And I think all I did with this balloon was just slap it so we got a nice low thud. And so altogether for the bow, we get this. There we go, quite a satisfying draw and a satisfying fire. So next up is the power-up bus. So the first track is basically just me whispering whatever came to my head into the microphone. The idea was that I wanted to reverse it, slap a load of reverb delay on and make it sound kind of mystical, like there's this ancient spirit powering up the bow. I don't know what the lore is behind Hanzo's Ultimate. In fact, I'll be honest, I've only played Overwatch once. I'm really sorry. Apparently it's really good. But I thought this was kind of a nice way to make it feel like there's a lot of energy going into the bow. A little bit cheesy, admittedly, just a whisper, but it kind of worked. I feel like it added to the ancient vibe that was going into this, you know, with all the Eastern dragons. So let's turn the processing off and see what that sounds like on its own. There we go. We can even listen to it without being reversed, I think.
Say the word Hanzo and fire your bow and arrow and I shall.
So you can see it was me just, whatever came to mind, I'll just speak into the microphone. But then if we take a look at the processing, we can have a look at what we did. Again, took out some noise. That was really noisy. EQ'd it, just took out whatever I didn't need. You could hear there was a lot of just low end from where I was probably a bit too close to the mic, where I was whispering. I had to get close so it could be heard, but at the same time the proximity effect kicked in and gave it a lot of low end, so I cut all that out. Next to some delay, classic way to make it sound weird and like it's moving all over the place. So it's only delaying it one time, but that was fine, to be honest. I didn't want to do it too much. Added some reverb. Again, I used some impulses from the Convology XT plugin and just found one I liked. Didn't tweak it too much with the settings here, as you can see. We will talk a bit later on some other times I've used this plugin where I do mess around with the settings and it, you know, really affects the overall sound. I suppose the one thing I did do was just make it completely wet. I took all the dry signal out, and so, you know, again, that just makes it feel a little bit weirder if there's no dry signal and it's just all reverb you're hearing. Next I did Tremolo because I love adding Tremolo wherever I can. I tried to make I've done a stereo tremolo is what I'm trying to say this time, as opposed to a mono one where the volume just drops to nothing and then comes up again. This time it's sort of panning from left to right. This worked quite well because it brought it out from the middle of the mix and just it meant it was sitting on the sides, which gave room for other sounds in the mix, like the bow itself and the arrow bursting, which you're going to hear in a bit. So that worked out quite nice. I'm glad it didn't, you know, muddy up the rest of the mix. And then finally, I just compressed it a little bit. Nice and simple. So the next is, these two kind of work together. So I've got the recording of me just chucking some beans into a hot pot and me frying up some bacon because I got really hungry while doing this. But it turns out these made for some great electrical sounds. Unfortunately, for some reason, OBS isn't recording the sort of video tab on Reaper for me anymore. It used to do it in all my old videos, but for some reason it's not doing it anymore. So let me know if you know why that is. But if you have a look at the video, which actually I might just chuck on your screen, you should be able to see some like sparks of electricity around Hanzo as he's drawing the bow. So that's where these came in. So the first one, the beads on their own. Let's have a look or a listen to what they sound like. There we go. So I did a little bit of automation on the pan just because Hanzo, in this video, he's a little bit to the left, so I wanted to kind of simulate that. In fact, I forgot to mention it, but I think I did that with the bow as well, as you can see here. I just panned it slightly. Now, if we take a look at the processing, I've EQ'd it to get rid of all the lows. I wanted it to feel a bit more staticky, so that kind of helped with that. Messed around with the pitch, dropped it down a bit so it didn't sound too weak, I suppose. And then finally added some distortion. Now, this is actually like a bit crushing distortion called Crush. I didn't want to mess around too much with that. I didn't want it to sound too electronic and like it's coming from a machine. I wanted it to sound like natural electricity. So I just boosted up the drive a bit, and I think originally I was going to modulate the filter on it, but I think I decided not to. So really, they can come off. Don't need them. So let's have a listen to what it sounds like with its processing on. There we go. That long tail, by the way, that is for the portal opening because there's electricity around that as well. That's kind of why I've automated the pan, so it starts off slightly to the left and then centered a little bit, which we'll again we'll look at the portal in a bit. But the second track, or the third track rather, the bacon frying, that's just to kind of layer up the electricity a bit because that also works quite well. So let's take the processing off and have a listen on its own. There we go. Now let's check out the processing on it. Quickly turn it on. Pretty much similar to the beans. Again, just cut out all the mids and the lows. Pitched it slightly, and surprisingly, I didn't add any distortion to this. Not sure why, but there we go. I suppose I didn't need it. I mean, the first one didn't really need distortion either, but it added to it. To be honest, I probably could have added distortion. Maybe I forgot. But altogether, those two combined sound like this. Cool, so that's a really easy way to get like an electrical sound if you don't have something that sounds electrical to record. You can just fry up some beans and bacon and have yourself a nice full English. So let's finally have a listen to the power up bus altogether. Okay, so next is the sound of the arrow bursting, and this is probably my favourite track out of the lot. This is also the one that took me the longest. I swear, I've nearly spent like 2 days on this. It drove me crazy at one point, but finally I've got something I'm happy with. So the first track in the arrow burst bus is the sound of a glass pot. Basically, I took like a glass pot and I hit it with a pen. And the sound of that kind of resonated nicely. It had a sharp sort of transient, but kind of decayed nicely and rang out for a good length of time. So I wanted to use that as a kind of, well, a mystical ring, but I also kind of, and this wasn't intentional, this was me just stumbling around trying to see what worked. It kind of sounded nice by using the transient as the sound of the arrow bursting. So hopefully I've communicated this well, but the idea was I wanted the arrowhead itself to burst into the portal you see where the dragons come out. And this is kind of what makes that sound as it is. Now, if we zoom in a bit, you can see I've got two markers. I've got one that kind of marks the time the bow is launched and the arrow's fired, and one when the portal opens and the dragon emerges. Now, if you'll notice, the glass pot is starting just a bit before the dragon emerges. Now, this is, I feel, really important. It's a little subtle detail that really adds to the overall feel. Instead of just a build-up and then a burst, you get this little kind of mini burst just before. And this kind of helps, it makes it feel very satisfying by hearing this kind of click-bang kind of feel. And I feel the contrast between this tiny little high-end burst compared to this low roar of an explosion you get when the portal opens, which we'll hear in a bit, really helps sell it and really helps, again, makes it feel really satisfying to hear. So just that tiny bit of delay between the start of this glass pot ringing out and the portal actually opening really helps, I feel. So enough of that, enough of me explaining it. Let's actually have a listen to what it sounds like on its own. So what I did is I recorded it and I reversed it a couple of times. So this first one here is the exact same recording here. It's me just hitting the pot, but I reversed it and put it in front. And this helps, you know, kind of build it up into the explosion. As you can see, there's a little pause in between, and this kind of, again, helps that feeling of the burst, feeling a bit more satisfying. I need another word than satisfying, but that's all that's coming to me. And then once it's rang out, I've repeated it again, but this time I've cross-faded them together so that you don't hear the initial attack of the sound, and it's just the ring. And again, we've got one where it plays in reverse, and then one where it plays normally. And so as the dragon's kind of coming out the portal and it's roaring away, you've still got this weird kind of mysterious ringing in the background. So if I turn the track down, let's have a listen without any processing on. There we go. If I turn the processing on and have a look at what we've done, again, took the noise out so we didn't get any background hiss. EQ'd it a bit. There was, obviously, the whole point of this is to get that resonant frequency that just lasts for ages. But at times it was a bit too much, so as you can see, I've really tried to pull it down a bit. Otherwise, it's just a bit too ear-piercing. And remove some of the low end that we didn't want. We just wanted all the high frequencies. And the mids, I suppose, as well. Messed around with the pitch. Oh, this is interesting. So I've upped it and mixed in the sort of original dry signal. So now you're getting a mixture of two resonant frequencies, and you're getting almost a harmony out of it. It might not be a musical harmony, but one nonetheless. Something I've also done with Reaper's pitch plugin. If anyone uses Reaper out there, this is something I didn't realize you could do. I was actually watching some of the videos by Cash the Car. He's doing some videos on using like a sample library and just kind of, you know, using Reaper to make a sound out of that. Again, I'll link that underneath this video for you to check out. But one thing he did is change the algorithm on the pitch plugin to give a different kind of effect. Now, I don't know what this does and how it works, but if you just mess around with some of the different algorithms, and then from there mess around with some of the frequencies you want to preserve, you get some really interesting results. And again, this wasn't really me aiming for anything in particular. This is me just trying stuff out and see what worked. And I guess I decided that preserving most of the pitches sounded really cool. So the next thing I did was add a little bit of distortion on, not too much, as you can see here. Usually this shape starts at about 20, so I dropped it down to 3. Otherwise it becomes too harsh and kind of bursts your ears a bit. Then again, added some reverb because you've got to. So this reverb here, A stereo, kind of added a bit of a delay to it as well, which is quite nice. And here you can see the waveform of the reverb itself, which I thought was quite a nice touch. You get that kind of staggered sound. Again, something weird and mystical, which, you know, gave it a lot of character. And then finally just compressed it a bit so it didn't, again, wasn't too harsh on the ears. Because that's quite an easy thing to do sometimes when you're working with high frequencies. So it's really important to control that. And to be honest, I did struggle a bit keeping the kind of the amplitude of the sound and that kind of resonant frequency we want to keep whilst balancing it with, you know, not shattering your ears, because obviously it's a high sound. It was a very delicate balancing act to get that right, but I'm hoping it came out well, and I think it did. So next, after that, we've got the first sound of the portal opening, and this is a reversed balloon. Now, I've used the balloons a lot in this, as you'll see in a bit. Again, I think I just hit the balloon. I just sort of held it in my hand and slapped it, so you get one thud. And as you might be able to see, but due to this little bit here where it says rate, I've stretched it out quite a bit. And usually that can kind of give you some weird side effects to your sound where you're kind of, you know, you're stretching out the frequencies and your DAW is having to fill in the gaps of those frequencies digitally. So that can kind of sometimes sound a bit weird and very mechanical and very artificial. But with this, if I quickly play it for you with the processing on first, so you can hear what it sounds like. It actually kind of gives it a nice kind of hum, which I felt was really nice to have at the bottom. So it's got a nice bit of low end, which makes this sound big and dramatic and give it a lot of weight. And again, that hum kind of makes it feel mystical. And then by adding in more reverb and delay, you get that kind of weird feeling of there's, you know, energy being manipulated in the air or something like that. So as you can see, there are tracks of me hitting the balloon, slapping it with my hand, and then taking some of them and reversing them, so you get that kind of fade in and out, that whooshy sound. And then again, I've just kind of crossfade them together, so it goes up and down, it goes ooh, like that. And then with most of these, the only one that keeps the transient of the slap and the attack is the beginning one here, as the sort of portal bursts open. And then the rest I've kind of crossfaded to make sure that's not included, and you just get the kind of decay of the sound. As you can see, there's a little bit of automation here. Pan's being automated slightly just so it tilts to the right as the dragon flies off to the right. But also I've automated the pitch to go kind of up and down, and again it gives you that rising feeling. If you ever look at the video again, the portal looks like it's kind of swirling, so we want to kind of recreate that motion, and one way I did that was kind of just rising the pitch up and dropping it down. Another thing, I'm not sure if I did do this, so I'll talk about it in a sec a little bit more, but I also used filters again to get that swirling feeling by taking like a high shelf or a low cut filter, whatever you call them, and just going up and down with that. It gives it kind of a feeling like a wave is sort of moving around. But anyway, let's have a look at the processing on the reverse balloon. If we open up the effects, you can see this is the pitch, obviously. Not much is being done because it's all being processed by the automation. So if I scroll the cursor along... Oh, hold on, let's quickly mute that. If I scroll the cursor along, you should see the sense kind of... it's a bit kind of not very smooth, but you can see the sense change as it, you know, goes up and down. And again, that's to give you the feeling of motion and make it feel like a wave or something swirling in the air. Next is Tremolo, because again, I love it. And I've talked about this before when we did the Bioshock magic sounds. Tremolo is really good for motion as well. So this time, instead of doing like a stereo thing, it's just a mono one. It's just going up and down in volume. But I just adjusted the frequency and the amount of tremolo I wanted till I found something that kind of worked well with the balloon. Next is some distortion. I can't imagine too much. Yeah, not too much. Just a bit of drive, just to make it a bit more interesting. EQ, I've EQ'd that in a weird place. It's in the middle of all my plugins. But this is to give it some low end, as you can see. Just again, this is kind of to sit at the bottom of the mix whilst the dragon's kind of coming out the portal. Again, some reverb. This time quite a big, long reverb, as you can see by the tail of it. I've also kind of stretched out the decay so it lasts even longer. And adjusted the wet and dry mix so it's you hear a lot of it, and then finally just compressed it a little bit. So next is tinfoil. So what I did is I took some tinfoil and I just crunched it in my hand. I just went really quickly. That's all that was. Let's quickly play you how that sounds without any processing on. Now it sounds a bit weird because it's being stretched a little bit, but luckily, again, I was worried that that might make it sound too artificial or too processed. But when it was blended in with the processing, it sounded quite nice. Let's quickly have a listen to it with processing on. So this, as you can hear, kind of fills up the body of the sound. It's a lot of mid-range and a lot of high-end, but it's not too harsh on the high-end. And then if we look at the processing, we've first got some noise reduction. Again, not going to talk about that too much. Pitch, again, well, it looks like it's doing a lot, but again, its main purpose is to be automated, as you can see here. So again, going up and down to give it a kind of feeling of motion. And we've got some EQ, taking out all the lows that we don't want, and just keeping the mids and the high end, boosting that a little bit. We've actually got the first of 2 convolution reverbs I've used. So the short reverbs, again, the same like I used on the kind of snap of the bow. And what's nice about using this and keeping it quite, well, I was about to say keeping it quite short, but I've actually stretched the decay out. But where the reverb kind of folds back over on the original sound, it thickens it up quite nicely, which I found on a lot of sounds. Again, that's why I used it on the snap. Just gave it a bit more texture, so that was quite nice. Next is some distortion. Again, not too much, because again, I didn't want it to sound too bit crushy. By the way, if anyone's got any good distortion plugins to recommend, that'd be swell, because this is the only one I'm using Reapers at the moment, but I would like 1 or 2 more. Then I've got some more reverb. This time, as you can see, it's a lot longer. This is to give it a bit more of a tail. So where the first one, I think, was mixed complete. Yeah, so the first one is just all wet signal. This one takes the, well, it's not dry anymore, but the original signal that comes out of this reverb and mixes it in with this new reverb. So you've kind of got a 40-60 split. As you can see, it gives it a nice long tail. Then we've got some more compression. And with this, because I didn't want the compression to kick in straight away, so the attack and the release are quite long. And then we've got some delay. Delay is very prominent in the sound. It gives it that kind of sound. And the way I did that was basically by boosting the feedback to quite a good amount, a substantial amount, so I felt it was necessary, and it wasn't too long, wasn't too short. Cool, so nearly done with the arrow bursts. Finally, we've got a plastic box. Now, the idea of this was to basically, the plastic box, really, I should have talked about it first, because it's kind of the first thing you hear. It's the big burst of energy. It's, you know, it's got harsh attack. It drops quite quickly. It's like the kick drum to this sound, and it gives it a lot of its punch. Again, as you can see, it's been, in fact, let's turn the processing off. So this is what it sounds like stretched. So again, it's stretched, worried it would feel artificial. Luckily, it doesn't too much. But if you've seen the video or the videos I've done on the magic sound for BioShock, and I think also I did a similar thing with the BFG from Doom, this is like the punch, the low end kind of sharp hit of transient that, you know, kicks in and really makes this feel like a burst of energy. So let's quickly check out the processing on it. Now, as you can see, I've actually dampened quite a lot of the low end, and you'd think with something like this, you'd want to boost it. But to be honest, because it's quite a low sound anyway, it's me just slapping a plastic box, by the way, because it's already quite low heavy, you don't really need to boost it too much. I actually found that leaving it as it was a bit too much. So that's why I've kind of pushed the low end down a bit, just to control it so it's not too harsh and too boomy. I've also, as you'll see in a bit, we've also got the dragon roaring that's going to kind of mix in with the portal bursting, and that is going to have a lot of low end as well. So it was really important for me to kind of control the low end and not make it all too muddy. If you've seen my video on the monster from God of War, the Hydra, that was it. One of the things, when I look back at it, one of the things problems I had with it was that it was too muddy in the low end. So this was something I was cautious of going into this. I didn't want all the low end to just go bleh, and you know, you wouldn't be able to hear each distinct bit. So the idea of this was to give you a thud, and that was it. Not too much of a thud, so it bursts your ears, but also not kind of gel in with the rest of the low end of the other tracks, if that makes sense. So that's why the EQ is the way it is. Some more reverb gives it some character and a bit makes it more interesting. Not much to say about this other than it's just all a wet signal. Compressed it quite harshly, well, not harshly, but I've kind of been quite strict with the attack, so it comes in quickly. And then finally, the pitch plugging here is being automated again. This time it's being dropped as you hear the FUD kind of decay away. And this was kind of to, I guess it's a bit cheating because I've kind of copied the original, but if you listen to the original, there's like I don't know what it is, it's like a sine wave or something that's kind of, it's low end, it's a low sine wave, and it plays, it kind of drops, it goes, and it sounds really dramatic, and you hear that in a lot of movies, I feel, when there's like a sci-fi explosion, and you know, I've always kind of been a sucker for that. It sounds really cool. So that's kind of what I've tried to simulate here. So the pitch drops as the box plays. So let's have a listen to it with all its processing on. That's kind of what I was going for with that. Oh, there's one more track I almost forgot about. So this is just basically, I think I took Massive, which is a software synthesizer, and I've used it to add noise into this, just to kind of fill out any gaps in the mix of all the other sounds, and make it sound whooshy, I guess, because white noise is a good way to, again, if you do like a white noise sweep, which you hear in a lot of like, I don't know, electronic or dubstep music, where it goes, that's kind of what I've tried to add here, because it's a really good way to make it's used a lot in explosions, again, to fill out a mix, but it also kind of just helps tie all the other sounds together quite nicely. So all it was just some white noise, filtered a bit. In fact, I think, did I automate the filter? I might have done, as I was look. Oh yeah, I did. So as you can see, it kind of, this low pass filter starts off quite open, and then it gradually closes, opens up again, and then closes down. And that's to give it, again, the whooshy kind of woo sound. Now I've just added some reverb, made it really wet, and some chorus, interestingly enough. I don't know why I didn't add more chorus, but this all kind of makes it feel a little bit weird and mysterious. The chorus is a quite nice alternative to delay sometimes, because it basically is like a funky delay. I don't know the ins and outs of how it works, but I think that's what it is. Let's turn the processing off and have a listen to it. So let's have a listen to it on its own. What's quite nice is where it kind of goes up again, it kind of feels like the dragon is moving past you and pushing air at you. So that was quite a nice touch. And then finally, I think all there was just some EQ. Okay, yeah, just to cut out some low end that we didn't need. Again, I could have added this and that would have made the portal sound a lot bigger, but I wanted to leave some room for the low end of the dragon, which you are about to hear now. But first, let's quickly have a listen to all of the sounds that make up the arrow burst on their own, because it sounds really cool. Nice, so really dramatic, really explosive. There's a lot going on in there. There's a lot moving around, which is what, again, motion is what I kind of wanted to capture. So I'm hoping that came across quite well. Now, unlike the other two buses, I start using some processing on the bus itself this time. The most obvious one is some automation on the volume, just to drop it out as the sort of portal fades away. But if we open up the FX button, we can see some pitch. So I've mixed in a wet and dry amount of pitch. So we've got the original sound coming in at full volume or full amplitude. But then the wet signal with the pitch lowered is kind of halfway there, just sitting in the background. Makes it feel a bit more heavier, which is nice. Then I've EQ'd all of it. Again, trying to cut out some of the low end. Well, some of the low end that won't be heard ever, because, you know, most speakers don't kind of recreate a lot of the frequencies. Or they do, but you just don't notice it, so there's no point having them. And again, trying to control the mix of it, really make sure I'm not messing up with the low end. And then finally, just compress it all together, which always just helps gel a load of sounds together. Cool, so that was the arrow burst. Finally, it's time to look at the dragon roar. So let's scroll down, unsolo that, and check it out. So again, balloons, because you got to. Now, as opposed to the first two times I used balloons where I was like smacking them, this time I took my hand and I rubbed it. And I rubbed it in a very interesting way. Instead of just grabbing it and just moving my hands as quickly as I can, so you get that rubbery mix of low and high end. It squeaks a bit, but you also get that kind of rumbly low end, which is what I did in a previous video. This time I kind of almost stroked it. Imagine you're stroking a cat very lightly. That's what I did, because it gave like you don't get any squeak, which is what I wanted, because this was actually meant to be the throat of the dragon, just rumble of it kind of gurgling as it goes past you. So I didn't want any squeaky high end, but it vibrated quite nicely, quite slowly as well, so it sounded like vocal cords kind of moving up and down. So the way I kind of interacted with this balloon was really important compared to the last two. It was very intentional, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. Let's have a listen to it quickly without any processing on. In fact, let me quickly turn the processing off of the master bus, because again, there's stuff going on there. So just completely dry now. So hopefully you can hear me kind of stroking that balloon. Again, there's no squeaky sounds as you rub it, but you can hear the vibration, which is important. So I mixed two tracks of me doing that together, as you can see, or two regions. Let's zoom in a bit, actually, so we can see it a bit better. And like I said, this is a nice way of communicating the power behind its vocal cords. Now let's stick the processing on, have a quick look at what we've done. So remove noise, not interested in that. EQ, boosted the low end. Okay, that's it. So where with the arrow burst, we were trying to control the low end. Now we're really trying to use and abuse it to make it feel like something powerful is in the room. We've got all that space down there, so we might as well use it now. Distorted it a bit, again, just with the drive. I've crushed it a little bit, but didn't want to mess around with these too much because I didn't want it to sound like it's, you know, being played for a speaker or anything electronic. Pitch again, tweaked both with the full range shift setting and the format shift setting. I think I've talked about this before, but this kind of changes the pitch without changing the pitch, or changes it in a different way, I suppose, where this kind of just takes all your frequencies and drops them and kind of lowers them. This maybe stretches it out, I'm not too sure, but it's a really nice alternative to traditional pitch shifting, and blended together it gave quite a nice mix. And as you can see, I've changed the algorithm again, and this time we're preserving some of the higher frequencies. That's interesting. But like we did earlier, this was not intentional. This is me just going, oh, this kind of works. We'll keep this in. So next is Tremolo. Tremolo again for the vibrations. Whilst it's already there, we've already got a nice kind of feeling of motion with the rubbing of the balloon. This added to it, so that was quite nice. Then some reverb. Not too much, I don't think. As you can see, I've really dropped the decay down. Other than, I think, one of these tracks, if I've ever added reverb to any of these, I didn't want it to sound like... I didn't want it to make up the sound of the dragon in the space around it. I wanted to just to add to the sound the dragon was making itself, if that makes sense. So obviously, if the decay was really long, it would sound like the dragon's in a big open space. But for these individual sounds, I just wanted to give character to the sounds themselves, to create the original dragon roar, if that makes sense. If I made it too long, it would sound like it's in a space, which I will do, but first we just need to make it sound like this isn't a balloon. Hopefully that makes sense. So this is character, not kind of giving it a sense of space, is why I've kept the decay quite low. Then I'll just up the mix so it's all a wet signal, which I quite like doing. Finally, just compressed it a bit just to control its levels. So here's the balloon with its processing on. Cool. Next on to the second balloon. So this time, instead of rubbing a balloon, filled it with air, and I let the air out by squeezing the tip of the balloon. This is something I did in the Hydra video, and it kind of what defined that sound was that squeak that kind of turned into a shriek by layering loads of these. Didn't want to do too much, but, well, I've ended up doing a load of balloons, but I didn't want to just use balloons for this. As you can see in a bit, we're going to use some more stuff. So that's why there's just one of these. If I quickly play it to you without any processing on. There we go. So it's just kind of like a hiss, not a hiss, a whine at the moment, which we're going to change the pitch of and, you know, alter so it doesn't sound like a balloon. But there's two of them for two separate roars. I wanted one close up and one far away. Let's now add the processing on and check it out. So let's check out the processing. We've got some pitch messing around. Again, this needed some severe pitch alteration because that, you know, couldn't leave it the way it was, otherwise it would just sound like a weird, weak whine. So dropping it quite a bit helps with that. And then just some tremolo. Again, just gives it a feeling of vibration. Pretty simple stuff. So let's now have a listen to it with the processing on. Cool stuff. Next is a glass vase. Now what I did is I took two... Is it vase or vase? I'm not too sure. Either way, took two glass pots, I guess, whatever you call them, and I just rubbed them together. Now these in particular, they had like grooves on them, which kind of crinkled together. And whilst this doesn't kind of stand out in the mix, this kind of sits in the background. It gave kind of a roughness, which I thought was nice. It just added a bit of texture, I suppose. It wasn't kind of... It's not the defining factor of the sound, but it did help build it, if that makes sense. So let's have a listen to it without any processing on. Oh, whoops, remove the cursor. And then let's check out the processing on it. So pretty simple stuff. Just took the low mids out of the frequency spectrum, dropped the pitch again and mixed in some of the dry signal, but not too much. And then just compressed it ever so slightly. And as you can see here with the pitch, I've also taken the... Let's quickly open the pitch up again. So I've taken the sense, or like... Oh, whoops, wrong one. The sense, which is like basically little adjustments to pitch. It's not like a whole semitone. Well, that doesn't make sense. It's not a semitone. It's just little. It's a little adjustment to the pitch, and I've automated it, as you can see. So it goes up and down, and this just kind of makes it sound like the dragon's moving its vocal cords. And, you know, it's not one tone just ringing out, going, it's going all over the place as it kind of roars and moves its head and stuff. Cool, so it sounds nice and weird and mixes in with the rest of the dragon roar sounds quite nicely. So finally, which makes up a lot of this character, is the sound of a knife. Basically, so I've got 2 metal knives. So what I did is I took 2 big metal knives and I basically rubbed them together. This gave a really harsh sound. So let's have a quick listen without any processing on. So as you can hear, it already sounds really rough. And that was just me. Again, one of them had like ridges on. That was me like rubbing the ridges. Yeah, this sounds really harsh and at first a bit horrible, not very nice. But that kind of works as you'll see, the processing really helps sell this as a dragon roar. But this makes up the main kind of cry. But at first, I was a bit worried that the metallic nature of it would sound a bit wrong, a bit like it's a robot. But it doesn't. It actually sounds like a really cool shriek from a loud monster. So let's turn the processing on and check it out. First, noise, don't care. Pitch. So pitch dropped it quite a bit and again messed with 2 different pitch settings and changed the algorithm. And this was again me just experimenting and see what worked. This really helped kind of change the sound and change it from a metal knife to a shriek. In fact, I'm going to quickly play it to you without the rest of the processing and just the pitch so we can have a listen to it on its own. See, now it's really sounding like something's going rah and screaming at you. Distortions next. This time we're using Reaper's just standard fuzzy distortion. Again, makes it sound harsh and dry almost, I suppose. Almost like the dragon's kind of, I suppose, not hurting itself, but you know when you've got a dry throat, it's uncomfortable to scream. That's kind of what I was going for with that. Make it sound really, not off-putting, I suppose, but like there's a lot of power behind it. Tremolo, again, oh, God, I love Tremolo. Just adds so much, makes a sound so much interesting, especially when I'm trying to add vibrations to a sound, I suppose. And it finally EQ'd it at the end. Oh, this is quite interesting. So look, as you can see, I boosted all the mids and just got rid of the highs and the lows. And this helped it sound very singular. That was really nice. So now, one final thing I did, as you can see, the knife is being used for the second roar. So I've dropped the volume a bit so it sounds distant. Now, one interesting thing I did, so unlike the pitch automation here where it's kind of all sporadic and all over the place but not doing too much change because it's only adjusting the sense of the pitch, this time I took the semitones and I just slowly increased them, and this was the finishing touches, the cherry on the cake. I felt like I wasn't sure if it's going to work at first, but it prevented the dragon from sounding too tonal, too like one pitch is playing at the same time. Because the knife rubbing has got all this kind of detail in its frequencies already, taking that detail and kind of slowly shifting it up made it sound like the dragon was really roaring. So I just want to quickly play that to you on its own with the automation. So can you hear it go up? It's really nice. I love that. That really helped sell it, I feel, for me. Finally, let's stick all the tracks together and have a listen to them. So nearly there, but it's sounding a bit dry. So on the master bus, I added some reverb. I definitely added reverb to sell it and, you know, blend it all together. Yeah, you can see here, so some reverb here, again, using some convolution reverbs. This one here, Cool Dark Place, had a lot of, it mixed the low end quite well. This time I've not made it too wet. I didn't want it to just be just reverb, otherwise it sounds like a distant yell. I still wanted it to feel like it was close to you. So I just added a little bit just to sell it, you know, make it feel like it's in a space, and the sound is bouncing off the walls, but the dragon's dry vocal cords are still screaming in your face. Then we got some delay. This was to, again, make it sound like the sound, if you look at the video, there's like mountains surrounding you everywhere. This is to make it sound like the sound's echoing off the mountains. So I mixed the wet and the dry, so there's not too much delay, or the delay's not too loud, and then just adjusted how much feedback there was and stuff like that. If we take a look at the automation, you can see here that the delay doesn't actually kick in until the end of the cry or the roar. So when the delay was coming in straight away, it was sounding a bit too much. You were getting all these layers stacking on top of each other, and again, it sounded muddy. So by just delaying the tail of the sound, it gave you that feeling of an echo. So that worked really well. Next is some EQ. Again, simple EQ. This is just to take out some of the low end that won't be needed and won't be heard anyway. And then finally, just compress it all together. Again, it's always a nice way to gel your sounds together. If I go back to the reverb quickly, one thing I did, whilst I said earlier that with the mix, I wanted it so that it felt close and not distant. Once we get to the second roar when the dragon is distant, as you can see here, I've automated the mix so the wet signal comes in a little bit more, which is appropriate because now the dragon's not close to you. So you expect to hear less low end and more sort of the high end shrieks, and you also hear it echo a bit more. So I've boosted the reverb. That's also, if I quickly go back, that's also why for the second roar there's only the copy of the squeezed balloon and the knife. Those are the two parts that make up the body and the sort of mid-range of the sound. The low rumble and the glass I've kept out of the second roar because you wouldn't expect to hear that so far away. And then finally just automated the volume so the second roar isn't as loud as the first. And the pan a little bit, adjusted it to the right as the dragon sort of moves to the right of the camera. I don't think the stereo image of the sound itself in relation to the camera is too important, but I thought that was quite a nice touch, so I've done that. So finally, let's have a listen to the roar with all of its processings on. Really cool stuff. Now, one other thing I forgot to mention is I've actually done some ducking or some sidechain ducking with the compression on the arrow burst. So as you can see here, the input is changed to an auxiliary input rather than the main input. Now, if we have a look at the routing for the arrow burst, click on it here, you can see that it's getting a signal, it's receiving a signal from the Hanzo voiceover track. So what I was basically doing is as Hanzo's yelling his as he fires the arrow, I didn't want that to get kind of masked over with the sound of the arrow burst because he does kind of say the last of that line whilst the portal's opening up. So what I did is use the amplitude of his voiceover to control the level of the arrow burst. So this way you can still hear his voice quite clearly, but you can also still hear the portal open. But other than that, I think that is everything to my sound. So let's have one quick final listen. This is in fact, we'll have a listen to the original tracks. This is what it sounds like originally from Overwatch. And then this, if I quickly get rid of that, is what mine sounds like. Cool, and there we go. So like I said earlier, thanks to Blipsounds for even hosting this competition. And if you want to check out their stuff, please do. Their YouTube channel, their Twitter, and their Discord will all be linked in the description. The Discord in particular, I can't recommend more enough. It's just a great community of audio designers helping each other out. And yeah, if you want to enter this competition, feel free to. But let me know if you want to see anything else from this channel, any other more sound design videos, if there's any particular topic you want me to cover. Let me know if you want more Fmod and Unity videos and all of that stuff. More than happy to check out your feedback and comments. And yeah, I think that's it from me. So thank you very much for watching. I've been Henry Scott, and I'll see you in the next one.